and he was sort of making jokes about Armored Core being similar to Dark Souls. And I told him, "Hey, would you mind just let's step out back into the back alley real quick. And let's have a talk."
The ship's approaching Rubicon. Wake up the dogs.
Establishing cerebral coral connection. Link verified.
Hey there, pilots. This is NoisyRen, transmitting the Rubicon Dogs podcast from somewhere out among the stars, bringing you all the Armored Core data you need to survive the battlefield. Let's get to it. What's going on, everyone? Welcome back, and we are on episode 10 of the podcast, officially in the double digits, and big things are happening. The YouTube channel has broken 1,000 subscribers. I think we're sitting at like 1,300 right now, growing like an absolute weed. The podcast is officially in double digits, which I'm told like 60% of people don't do, so definitely happy about that. Happy we're stuck around. And today we have a special guest. We are interviewing FromCheng, who runs Armored Core Legacy, and who also had a chance to go to the Hanger event along with all the other content creators and news outlets. I'm sure you've seen the videos around, all kinds of gameplay dropping. So they're going to give us the inside scoop on that, what that event was all about, what happened, and other gameplay details, many of which the other content creators haven't really touched on or things I haven't seen. So we have a ton of content to cover and not a lot of time to do it in, so we will jump straight into it. So thank you for joining me, FromCheng. If you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do in the community.
Yeah, of course. So for those who don't know me, I am FromCheng. Also went by FarmBoy28. I joined this community back in 2010. I ran the Armored Core wiki for a while, and then from there, I did some work for Armored Core Online / Mechaverse. And basically, I've just been in the community sort of helping out, creating content for a while, but also just trying to do stuff to help build up the community in terms of resources and people being able to find just content creators in general. And I've created Armored Core Legacy, and then also PIO, which is sort of a sub-org, Pilot's internal organization, which is basically our social media newsletter.
Awesome, perfect. Well, I've certainly have seen all of those things. I had no idea that they all ran through the same person. So that's awesome. You do a lot of work. Great. Well, we have had just a massive amount of news drop, I feel like, in the past couple of days. We went from hearing nothing but crickets and me, going through videos frame by frame to now I can't even like keep up with everything. I've spent the day, I mean, it's been a busy day in general, even outside of AC stuff, but I think I've watched everything, from all the content creators once through, but haven't had any time to really like freeze frame stuff and deep dive into anything. So I'm coming at it, I think, with kind of general knowledge of all the information that is dropped, but without in-depth review of anything.
Yep, it's like drinking from a water hose, right? It's like
It really is. And just quickly, what are your thoughts on that? Because I know you had mentioned in your other interview that working with FromSoft is kind of like working with a cat, and then they just kind of do whatever it is that they want.
So this is something I think the community needs to understand really well, that From Software sort of does what they want. So they don't always follow the general knowledge or trends. And this is something they obviously have in their game design, but also just their general style of operation as a company. So this definitely struck me as a little weird, because you have basically all this information coming at once. And then on top of that, you had information just like an hour or two ago, and then 3 or 4 days ago, where it's like there's kind of too much information right off the bat to process. I noticed, like, for our analytics, some of our stuff was sort of trending lower. And I think the reason is because there's so much stuff out there. One, people are getting confused by what was seen, from Bandai Namco, the official stuff, and then the stuff that's being released by the content creators. So some of them are sort of getting that confused, so they're not necessarily looking through everything. And then the other thing, too, is that because there's so much stuff out, they're being split up between so many different channels and videos and sort of so on and so forth.
Yeah, I've even seen that issue because I did my reaction to the trailer, and then a few other things here and there. But yeah, I think between Bandai's official stuff coming out and then all of the gameplay coming out from the other content creators, kind of at the same time as the reveal, which I thought was really odd. It's kind of just overshadowed and jumbled everything. So yeah, I feel like it's almost hurting everybody all at once to have it all just dropped in one big lump.
Yeah, and this is one of the issues where we've had in the past when it's like working with From Software is um, a lot of what they doesn't feel like it necessarily makes sense. So there's a lot of stuff that happens at the last minute. There's a lot of stuff that's canceled at the last minute, and there's a lot of stuff where they'll give you sort of the bare minimum information, and then at some random point they're like, here's all the details. Here, have fun. Yeah,
Just
just
yeah, day before release. Here's
exactly. Here's
everything.
absolutely everything you need to know about this game.
Yep. Well, it's been rough, but we'll just start at the beginning. So they released a story trailer recently. I mean, I thought it was awesome. It's very very dark, as one expects
Mhm.
from Soft. But I don't know. I feel like it is maybe more emotional and a little more dark and gritty, and even just more. I don't know how to put it. Maybe just more storyline driven than some of the previous
Yeah, I
AC
think
games.
so. With the Armored Core games, depending on which generation you talk about, they do have a specific narrative style and sort of setup. So 1 through 3 is pretty similar, with some exceptions. So based on what I saw in that trailer, it basically reminded me a lot of about the narrative setup and style that you have for 4 and 4 Answer. So you do have there's a slight personal tone. It's not super massive, especially like for Armored Core. But then you have sort of a setup in the background of sort of um, I don't know if you describe it as sort of a dark situation, and just very depressing.
Mm,
For example, Armored Core 4, you're the Anatolia Raven, and you're trying to fight for an organization or city, for Anatolia. But you're
yeah.
outnumbered, and the corporations are starting to turn against you, and basically do anything they can to kill you. And then for 4 Answer, not quite as personable or personal rather, but a lot of those undertones of sort of the corporations and their actions of causing, this general situation of despair and destruction, and that sort of fits within that realm of sort of storytelling. And I almost hesitate to say this, but um, in some sense, you have a Dark Souls element for that sort of story path, which sort of makes sense because it's not about Dark Souls or Armored Core. It's more a Miyazaki thing,
Yeah.
So it follows a
Yeah,
clear
for sure.
trend.
It does, and yeah, I know
Yeah.
you hesitate to say it, and that's what I tell anybody who even remotely mentions Dark Souls, like, in the comments of stuff. I'm like, "You're just inviting discord and chaos."
It's sort of funny. I saw Ouroboros. So before the hangar event, there was actually a party the day before. Once everyone basically got into town, and he was sort of making jokes about
Hmm.
Armored Core being similar to Dark Souls. And I told him, "Hey, would you mind just let's step out back into the back alley real quick. Let's have a talk." So and we're kind of teasing him for it.
He's coming in at new, right?
Yeah,
He's never
he's
played an
pretty
AC
much
game
brand new to the
before.
series. So I actually first had a chance to talk to him at the Summer Game Fest, and it's like I think he may have touched an Armored Core game before, but it's like it's a situation where he's basically brand new to it. No real previous experience, nothing really significant.
Yeah. Yeah, and I noticed we have this really weird mix of people as there's a lot of content coming out from, news
Yep.
outlets and other content creators and things that have kind of no history with the series at all, which I think, in his case is a good
Yeah.
thing. You do get this fresh eyes, you get people who are coming from Souls, and it's very kind of relatable to the new audience. I do wish there was a little bit more from people who've been around, kind of since the beginning, and you can get a real veteran's perspective on it too.
That's I think that's where things get a little bit weird because the history of Armored Core is a lot more chaotic than it is with Dark Souls. So especially when you talk about the community, there's like
Yeah.
sort of hard lines on where one community existed and another ended. And what that means is there's a huge fracture in the community. So you have people that played the old games, but never were on the forums. You have people who played the old games but were part of the PvP scene or the forums. You have the new school players that, let's say, maybe played 4 and 4 Answer, and the only thing they did was PvP. Or you have the 5th gen people who did some PvP or maybe were just on the forums. So you have so many different smaller groups in the community with so many different experiences. And I don't think it's always a straight cut where, okay, we have these 100 people that are all old gen vets. It's a massive mix of different groups here.
Yeah. It's true, especially when you get to, people who prefer old gen or 4th gen or 5th, and,
Oh yeah.
each one hates the other game. So, yeah, there's a lot of chaos in there, though it does
Yep.
seem like it's bringing in elements for all of it. In my head, I would like to think that maybe it makes everybody happy. I don't think that's gonna be the case, but
Yeah, I mean, I wish, but you sort of saw the situation when they showed the initial footage from Summer Game Fest without the lock on. There was, even the most minute details, people were just not happy.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I feel like that's how it goes, right? When something changes, that's everybody's initial reaction. I have to say that I feel like that's died down a lot. There's now a lot of people that are like, well, I'm skeptical about it, but I'm much more willing to give it a chance versus the people who saw, like 2 seconds of lock on and they're like, game is bad. I'm never touching this. Why would they destroy the franchise like this?
Yeah, and you know what? It's not just our community, but I noticed that there has been a shift with sort of the general public and the media. Because if you look at a lot of the articles that came out when Armored Core 6 was first announced and before they showed any gameplay footage, it was neutral or pretty negative. And there's a lot of reasons for that. One, it's hard to play an Armored Core game. Because it's hard to get, but also it's an experience hasn't aged very well in some ways, and also there's just the unknown about what the series actually is, and I think that's partially what also contributed to all those interviews and those articles that say, "Is this Dark Souls?" Even though From Software had to come out and say it multiple times, no, it's not. Yeah, but I noticed that
They're
like
still
it's
saying
died
it.
down a lot. So for example,
It
I'm
has.
doing a PO special that should be going out soon. And basically what I went through is I went to find articles that were released today after the gameplay preview trailer. So you have, your smaller sites, your fan sites, then you have the bigger guys such as Gamatsu, VG2427, GameSpot, and so on and so forth. And generally speaking, if you read those articles, the opinions are positive or really positive. So that's a huge shift in the tone that we've seen just from today.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I was really surprised, yeah, when Game Informer came out and they had this, big reveal for the magazine and it's on the front cover,
Yep.
and then the article was like, well, it's not Dark Souls.
Subpar.
So,
Yes.
and then they spent the first 2 pages talking about how The Office was boring and there was nothing there.
See, what's even worse about that is they also have a podcast show which aired, I think, right after that.
Oh yeah, haven't
And if
listened
you
to that.
listen to that podcast, when you get to the timestamp, the first 10 minutes are talking about the weather and flights in Japan, and then the next 20 or 30 is just ragging on. Yeah, it's not Dark Souls. It's a mech game, but that's not really interesting. It's just mech parts and all that stuff. It's like, dude, really? Is this really the level of journalism that you have?
Right?
Like they were there, I think, for like a full week, like actually there in Japan. So like if From Software saw that, think about what they think of that.
I know. Yeah, you invite, this magazine out to do all this, and yeah, they just kind of trash them the whole time.
Yeah.
Next time, they should just invite us. It'll be great.
Yep. Just
But
ship like 6 of us.
yeah,
We'll be in the cargo. That's fine. We'll take it. We'll handle it.
exactly. Oh, perfect. So, you're talking about the event that you went to, which I
Mhm.
unfortunately wasn't able to go to. So if you want to elaborate a little bit more on that,
I think we've seen a lot of gameplay reveals come out of it, but what was the event really?
Yeah, so basically what it was a Bandai Namco / From Software event, and it's basically uh, a demo event. So they invited out a bunch of media and content creators to come out and try Armored Core 6. Based on what I've talked with other people, it sounds like there was more than one event. So the one we went to was in Fullerton, California. It was at Hangar 21 at the Fullerton Municipal Airport. But I think there was one more in the UK. And potentially one in Australia and another one in the US. But basically, they're inviting people out to try Armored Core because I think this was an attempt to get people to better understand what the game is, particularly the media. So basically, it was a 1 day event. Fly in 1 day. We have the event and then we fly back out. First day we got there, we checked in, and then they held a party on the top floor of the building, and that's basically a chance for all of us to get together and talk a little bit. We also had a chance to see some of the Bandai Namco folks, the people who made that large scale AC model. They were actually there at the event as well.
Oh, really?
And we had a chance to talk to them. Yeah, they talked basically, how they built it, how long it took, the approximate scale, which I think was about 80%. It was very interesting. Oh, go
Sorry,
ahead.
I was going to ask you about that because it sounded like they had an NDA on how big it was, and that's definitely been a point of question, right? Is how big is the AC? Can a
Yep.
person actually fit inside the cockpit, et cetera, which the story trailer had led to all kinds of questions on that too. And I'll try to avoid getting into any well, I think they want you to avoid
Yeah.
getting into any spoiler territory as well.
Right.
But yeah, we'll go into the storyline fresh. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, but basically, it's approximately, and they didn't give us the exact amount. It's like 80% the size of, a normal AC.
Okay.
So it was great to talking with them because they too were sort of Armored Core fans. So them getting a chance to sort of work on this was, it's sort of a dream thing. And so that was actually my first time being able to see that model when we went, because I posted a picture on my Twitter. That was actually the second time I saw it, so I had a chance to see it prior.
Nice. Yeah, I saw it seemed like they had it set up at that event before it actually made its way over. Um,
Yep.
so yeah, that's awesome. I would have loved to have seen it, all the smoke and stuff coming out of it.
Yeah, it was great. I think it followed basically the same line as Summer Game Fest, where they were trying to go pretty heavy on the theming. So with the video that, if you may have seen on my Twitter, basically I do a full walkthrough of the place. So once you get to the front of sort of the place, you have the giant Armored Core 6 sort of plastered there, and then you walk in. There's a big screen with the trailer playing, and then as you walk to your left, you have the AC sort of in a giant cage being suspended in the air. And then you have the double doors where you walk in, and then you have sort of that, techno industrial sort of rustic look to it. And as soon as you exit, you have the main hangar area where they have about 30 gameplay setups. And then they also have the giant quad mech that you could ride.
Yeah, and what better place to put it than a hangar? I can appreciate all the theming that goes into it in the very least, even though, especially since you couldn't talk about it for 2
Yeah,
weeks, they could have easily just done it in a hotel room or
right.
an
Old school.
event hall or something. Yeah, yeah. So I can heavily appreciate all the theming that went into it. So yeah, one thing that you've mentioned that a lot of people haven't mentioned or haven't touched on about much is that quad mech, we'll call it quad
Yep.
robot that they show off that's flipping cars.
Yeah, so that is Exosapient. So they're a company that basically, I guess, goes out and does these sort of entertainment sort of stuff. So basically, it's a giant mech. To ride it, we had to sign a waiver beforehand. But basically, you got your basic movements forward and back, and then you have almost like those giant tusks on the front there. Um, we also saw those people at the party. Now I think of it as well. But that was amazing because it's just a giant robot, and sure, it's a little bit slow, but it's like for Armored Core, that's a pretty great experience,
Yeah, for what more could you want for when you go to an AC event than to be able to walk around in a giant
If you had
robot?
two of them that could fight each other, that would have been better.
Oh. We'll get that one that Japan has too, and we'll fly it over.
That other quad, yeah.
We'll do a thing. There'll be some more some extra waivers,
Yeah.
I think, for that to happen. Okay, perfect. So you go to your party, you go to the hangar, you flip some cars on a giant robot, and then we move into gameplay. Is that how that works?
So there's one more step before that, and that was we had a chance to get a briefing or presentation rather from Yamamura and Ogura from Software, and basically it's very similar to what they gave to Summer Game Fest, but they had more details. They gave a brief overview of what Armored Core was, and then some additional details about the game, and right before we started playing that, and after that, that's when we started playing. This event was a bit interesting because we were allowed to do our own game capture. So what you see from those other creators, they had to bring their own equipment to do that. From
interesting.
Software and Bandai Namco didn't provide anything.
Huh, that's interesting. With all the computers and everything there, I figured it was just a full setup, and I don't know, you just like send it to yourself or something. But that's
I
interesting.
honestly wish that was the case because we had quite a few technical difficulties. So the first one was the power issue because you have basically 30 computers all sitting together on I think the same power breaker or whatever. I can't remember off the top of my head.
Yeah.
So it was causing issues for like 25% of the setups. So they had to move them to different areas. So for example, Fighting Cowboy got to go up the stairs and play on the big screen where they originally gave the presentation.
Fancy.
Yep. But that also means that
Luxury
we
seat.
generally didn't have enough plugs. And then the other issue too is with the general game capture. I think for my setup, it took 30 minutes. And then we had another creator. I don't know if you know Aggie or Little Aggie.
I'm not familiar myself now.
Yeah, I think he's a Dark Souls content creator, but he also does like speed runs. Man, he got it bad because apparently his agent had told him that he didn't need to bring anything except a flash stick.
Oh, that's rough.
Yeah, so what I try to do is, luckily I had over prepared. I had brought 2 setups to the event. So I tried to get him set up with mine. So that took about another half hour to hour away from my chance to play the game. But then the other thing too is that capture card started to die in the middle of the gameplay.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, so you could see it on the OBS preview screen where it just like sort of it stutters really badly. So that's unfortunately the reason why he didn't post any gameplay footage, just because most of it wasn't usable.
Yeah.
Poor guy. It's just bad
that's
luck.
terrible.
Yeah, and then
everything sounds like everything happened to him.
Yeah, and then Cleric brought his own setup, but because we didn't have anything to plug his laptop in, his ran out of battery. So we basically, instead of having 10-ish hours of footage, we had maybe 6 or 7 in total.
Oh man, that's rough.
Yeah, it's one of these things when it comes to these events where, and especially since I feel like based on the vibes I got talking with BN and also having worked with From Software before, it feels like some of the stuff was last minute. It's just stuff you got to deal with at that time.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess that's part of having it, in a hangar and with all the theming and stuff is you lose a little bit of that just convenience of, tons of outlets in the wall and all of that. So that's unfortunate, but I am certainly happy that you got, video and that most people got a lot of good video. And you said you got to play about 6 hours or so, and then you each get to show off, I think, 20 minutes of certain levels.
Yep. Yeah. So generally speaking, in total, because we also took breaks and there were other events that happened then. But in terms of gameplay, just for my setup, it was maybe closer to 4.5 hours. I think most people got 5 tops. But yeah, so about 4 to 5 hours. And then based on sort of requirements that came up at the last minute, we could only use 20 minutes and it could only be specific missions. Which is sort of a bummer because it seems like the Japanese side didn't have that same restriction, because one of the
Yeah, I saw.
yeah,
Go
one of
ahead.
the restrictions is you couldn't show the arena because you had 3 arena fights, and they basically just showed that, and it's
Yeah,
like,
yep, we're thinking of the same video.
yeah, so that was a little bit odd, and the other thing too is it came, like, at the last minute, like, the day of or the day before. So, it was like, we were all a little bit surprised about that.
Huh, yeah, that is very a lot of last minute stuff, but I guess that's how it goes, with these
The
things.
it honestly
Um,
happens a lot with From Software because I do remember that being a constant theme during the 5 and Verdict Day era.
well, I guess we know what to expect in the
Yep.
future too then, I guess. 'Cause apparently it's just been like that, since they
Yep.
started, so oh well. Come prepared, bring extra capture cards and flash drives and power
Be
strips
ready.
maybe,
Yep.
but okay, okay. Um, Great. So, kind of jumping into it, I have a list of some questions that I thought of that I didn't
Sure.
see either anybody talk about or kind of immediate answers to. I'm sure some of them are answered just in the gameplay footage
Mhm.
itself, but I haven't really had time to kind of dive it down
Sure.
into it. But the first one isn't, I guess, specifically gameplay related, and you might not know the answer to this. But any clue if the game supports that, HD rumble or haptic feedback for PS5
Oh,
controllers?
no, they did not mention that at all. So and it was a little bit weird too. So you may have seen on the AMA, we were on we were on computers, but using Xbox controllers. Um,
Okay, it was Xbox controllers. I knew at least a few of you had Xbox, but I wasn't sure if you brought your own or what that was.
I asked if we could bring like a PS5 controller, but they didn't get back to me on time. So I actually didn't get to investigate on that further.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm super curious on that one. I really just want to feel the like pile pull back and launch into the enemy. If I can just feel that, I'll be a very happy
Yeah.
Raven. Cool. So they go in a lot of how to put it. They go in and say that these are really large levels compared to some of the other games. I've
Yep.
heard it called an AC4 map and an AC5 map together, and it's still
Mhm.
bigger. So they've talked a lot about the size of the levels, but there seems to be varying opinions on, I guess, how important that is. Some people are saying they're very large and you can go around and explore stuff. That eventually, I don't know if you guys got to see any, but eventually there'll be some crates, I guess you'll call them, with hidden parts kind of scattered
Mhm.
around. So very, in line with old games there. But in terms of exploration, do you think that does it incentivize you going through all of these levels? Does the story kind of naturally take you through most of it? Or is there just kind of no point to, start the level and go off left 1,000 feet?
So we sort of asked a variation of that question when we were talking to Yamamura and Ogura. Um, so long and short of it is, yes, these maps are big, and yes, they do encourage exploration, but not necessarily every map. The way they put it is, when it comes to the gameplay, if you have an objective during the mission, especially if it's like a difficult one where you have to fight like a boss or AC, um,
Hmm.
chances are the exploration is going to be minimal or nothing. So mainly it is going to be missions where that's not as high a priority. So let's say, for example, there's a mission where you have to destroy some transport helicopters. It's a mountain with sort of a lot of snow in it, but there are also some sort of structures and wide open areas where you can sort of navigate around. So for a map like that, yeah, you probably will have hidden parts, but something where you have, let's say, a boss, you probably will not see it there. So there's sort of varying levels of how much exploration you'll get per map.
Okay, okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I think they had said something to the effect of like once you kind of figure out where they put stuff or like what sort of level might have hidden parts, you'll kind of get it if there's likely to
Yep.
be one or not. So do you have any idea on if there's something that keeps track of those hidden parts or anything like that? Like do you know like, oh, this level, eventually when you beat the level, do you know like, oh, this level had one or I have to go find it? Or is it just up in the air until you realize like you just don't have this part that everybody else is using?
So based on the gameplay we had, there was no like, so usually, um, let's say for example, 5 and Verdict Day, if there's a hidden part, it usually has like on when you pause the game or you go to sort of like the menu to select, it'll tell you there's 2 parts of 3 or so on and so forth. There was nothing like that in the gameplay. And I think people did explore around and no one found a hidden part. So I don't know if it's because they just gave us like a beta version of the game and specifically removed that so as to not, reveal any secrets, or there just wasn't any parts in the first part of the game. But there's no like obvious menu or section which shows you, number of parts found, hidden part found, so on and so forth. So I'm wondering if it's sort of like older games where you just get a pop-up box once the mission is complete to tell you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I was curious about. There's the classic, like you start the mission and just turn around and the part's behind you. I'm really hoping that they throw one of those in there just because, or maybe one in the training arena, something like that. Just some callbacks to those kind of shenanigans. As far as I think, I don't know. It's just such a random assortment of questions here, so I'll just kind of run through things. So the damage type in this one, so it sounds like just like 5, there's 3 different damage types. I believe they took out chemical and put in explosive,
Yes.
something to that effect. Okay, so there's still the kind of the 3 damage type rock paper scissors. With that, one thing that I didn't care for as much in 5 and Verdict Day is this kind of weight class specific defense that you get. Is there any ideas on if it tends to still lean in that direction where heavies are really good against one specific type and lightweights are pretty good defense against another type, or is it pretty diverse? Any clues?
Yeah, so we actually at the very end of the game, what we did is we made sure to sort of go through all the parts that we had and just have a look at the defenses. So with Armored Core, Verdict Day, and 5, when it comes to the defenses, there's sometimes a pretty huge disparity. So sometimes you'll have 2,000 in one area and like 500 in another. Looking at the defenses and the actual stat numbers, the groupings for the values are closer. So for example, I have on my screen the LG011 Melander legs. The 3 defenses are anti-kinetic, anti-energy, and anti-explosive defense. Those 3 defenses are 369, 340, and 361. And that value doesn't change too much when you go to the next leg. So, for example, the heavy biped, the energy and the explosive defense are still about 380, 390, but the anti-kinetic is now 414. So it's more closer to how it's done in the older games.
Okay. I think I like that better because you would just specific types of ACs would just be better against other weight classes and stuff. So I think this is more interesting in that effect. I do wonder if it means that how to put it, that the type doesn't matter as much, if that makes sense. So if all of your defenses are relatively close together, does it really matter if you're using an explosive weapon? I mean, minus stagger, which we can get into, or energy or kinetic. Does it really seem to matter in that regard?
So this is where it gets a little bit difficult because most of the enemy in game look like they use kinetic and some explosives, but the parameters of how they deal damage has kind of changed a bit. So what I think, and I don't know this for sure, is that there is sort of a different scaling in the system per damage type. So based on how much you have in that area and the damage that a weapon can do, and I suspect mainly like energy. Especially if you have a huge disparity, it does a lot of damage. Now, I don't have any proof at this point in time. I haven't really analyzed the gameplay in that sort of depth. But I feel like they are going to retain at least some elements of how the triple defense / damage system worked in 5 and Verdict Day. But obviously not to quite as an extreme degree.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's a good way to do it. I'm fairly happy about that, I think, because that was, a big one, and I think when they first released pictures of the parts, it just had your general defense stat because they didn't have the expanded screen. So everybody's like, did they just take out damage types altogether, or what's happening with that one? So it's nice to
and the other thing
get
too
confirmation.
is there may have been some stats that have changed. So for example, I think it's the generator. It used to have a cooling stat. I went back and looked and took a screenshot. It's not there anymore. Like
Really? Is it gone entirely, or did they just change the name of it?
That I'm not sure. I have to look back at my notes. But I do remember From Software talking about that. I think it was like in an interview.
Mhm.
And they said that step was like it was like temporary or it was like a placeholder. So there's still, they're still making minor modifications to the game.
Yeah. Yeah, they'd said yeah, just that it wasn't, like, finalized. So, yeah, I was curious if the stat still existed and just the name, cooling was misleading or
It could just be hidden.
true.
Because I think, for example, muzzle velocity for weapons, that's no longer a visible stat either.
Which is interesting because apparently, according to their talk about PvP and how that's gonna work, muzzle velocity is pretty important, so I'm surprised that they're not showing that one, if anything.
It's one of those things where I'm guessing they feel that not showing the information is sometimes helpful is not the right word, but it gets you to sort of view things in a certain mindset. It's sort of like with the
Mhm.
Street Fighter games having that stun bar where you're able to see it versus where you have to mentally keep track of that yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, it probably encourages a little bit of kind of exploration of the weapons too, instead of just scrolling through and like, "Oh, that one has a really low velocity, that's never gonna hit anything," and you just skip it.
And that also makes sense too, because one of their biggest philosophies, and they brought this up a lot during our interview, is that they want players to build an AC for themselves that is personalized to them, is a combination that they feel works best for their style. So them sort of simplifying some stance and also just making them not visible anymore means that I guess theoretically they want you to focus less on each individual stats, but also what you feel is going to work best for you.
Yeah, yeah, they've definitely leaned a lot into this one into, yeah, what the combos are going to be like and what your
Yep.
mech is as an overall whole. In your experience, and I know you guys didn't get to try out very much, and you were probably kind of rapid firing through weapons just to try them out and get video of them. But did everything feel fairly balanced in your opinion, or was there anything stand out like, yo, that is overpowered?
Um, I would say generally it did feel balanced. There are sort of a few nitpicks here and there. So the first one is I think the Gatling gun. Um,
Starts with the Gatling gun.
yeah, because it's got a lot of ammo and it fires very fast. So it's one of those things that seems like it can pin you down pretty easily. But overall, I would say it felt fairly balanced based on what I saw. Because been a big shift here where a lot of weapons have much lower muzzle velocity. So you don't really
Yeah,
have a lot of those instantaneous, fire weapons that you did earlier in the series. And I think
yeah,
part
that's
of
what it
it,
seemed like.
yeah, because I think it's basically they're trying to balance out the fact that you have four weapons now, and also trying to get you to focus a little more on the stagger system.
Yeah. Well, I've got Gatling guns on the brain, I guess. Most of the back weapons I saw seem to be cannons, or we get the shield, and there's of course a lot of missiles.
Mhm.
Were there any back, Gatling guns, or not really a rifle, I guess, but yeah, anything that wasn't a like large caliber cannon or missile?
Yes. I can't remember off the top of my head though, because it was on Cleric's capture, and unfortunately,
Mm.
the the latter half, which is probably the most important part, he didn't record. Um,
Ah,
but yeah, there are some. I don't believe it's all scenarios though, but there are some cases where you can switch to like Verdict Day, where it's another hand weapon.
yeah, I've seen it where you can switch between hand weapons.
Mhm.
What I want is just four Gatling guns firing at the same time. Just absolute bullet hell.
Pro-
But yeah, I did see you could equip,
yep,
hand weapons on your back in that kind of carousel system.
I think you probably can because really being able to purchase that is really just based on you have enough credits.
Yeah. So with that, it seems like the ability, to get the carousel system and the kicking and all of that, you kind of gradually unlock through the arena matches and a few other things as you unlock. I don't know what they're called, but that like token that lets you kind of purchase these
I
abilities.
think it's I think it's
Um,
OS
but
credits. I think, and
yeah,
yeah,
that sounds right.
and you
I know it's related
yeah, and you
to
use
the
it with
OS.
the OS tuning. So basically, I think for the arena matches, when you beat them, at least the three we had, you get two or three OS credits, and then from there you can spend it on whatever perks or upgrades you want.
So is that something that just once you buy it,
you have it, or can you, do you get like, oh, you can spin, or you get like 3 slots for these? So you're like, okay, I want quick turning, I want assault armor. Well, I guess that would be your expansion
Yeah.
slot, but yeah, for your OS tuning ones, is it just you can have all of them should you choose to, or is there like a limited set?
So it doesn't look like there was a limited set because we purchased, I think, 3 or 4, and we could just use them all at once.
Okay,
Yeah, but I'm
interesting.
wondering if they may modify that later because that seems like some of those feels like it's almost like should be an optional part where you only have a certain number, otherwise it gets excessive.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I was curious watching it because I didn't hear anybody really touch on it. And I'm like, yeah, well, if eventually you're just going to equip all of them, which I guess sort of goes the way of the other games with, Human Plus and OP
Right.
Intensify and things, and you just gradually accumulate all of these extra abilities. So I guess it's not exactly off
Hmm.
brand, but it seems maybe overtuned. But I haven't played it at all, so I could be just wildly inaccurate on that. So speaking of other things that may absolutely have no basis, but I had just a slight concern on. There's a spot on Vadi's video where he's fighting, I think it's called the Goliath or the Behemoth, that big shield
The
one.
tank or
Yeah, yeah, it's like a tank and it's got some boosters on the back
yep.
that it's
Hmm.
its weak point. So he's fighting that and he says that I think it was double bazookas maybe, but he pulls out, 2 bazookas and basically stun locks it until he destroys it. Is there any Did you notice any ability to stun lock things? And specifically, did you notice the potential to stun lock enemy ACs? Slash, is that going to be a PvP issue?
Um, I'm gonna say based on what we saw, no. But keep in mind we only saw about 50-ish parts, so obviously that could change. From Software's balancing can sometimes be really whack. Um,
Yeah.
but I would say when it comes to your AC, and part of this plays into what I said before about the muzzle velocity. A lot of weapons fire really slowly. So in order to do those stun lock setups, you really have to set them up or be very close. So for example, the bazooka, that thing fires extremely slow. There were many cases where I would fire missiles and I would fire the bazooka and the missiles would get to the enemy first before the bazooka did. Yeah,
Oh
and I
wow.
think I posted the gameplay footage of Attack the Watchpoint. And in that mission, I fight an enemy AC using 2 bazookas. And basically, if I wasn't point blank or if that AC wasn't standing still, the shot would never hit. It's too slow. So I think that plays sort of a big factor
Okay.
here where even if you have just a little bit of mobility or even just a little bit of cover, you can avoid those setups.
Okay. Gotcha. So speaking of mobility, were you able to mess around with the tanks at all? I know a lot of people did, and I think that was
Yes.
a big initial early concern for people was that if you had these big telegraphed attacks and you're in a tank, you maybe not can just like jump out of the way as easily. So do they at all feel at a disadvantage in those large boss fights, or do they just play differently and definitely hold their own all the same?
I mean, personally, I do feel they are still at a bit of a disadvantage. Um, it's not so bad turning wise because they literally can turn on the Axis now, which they could never
Mhm.
do before. Um, but the booster is built into the AC itself, so that alone, it's a staple thing in the series. But that alone changes how you have to play the game because you have some limitations on your sort of setups. And the one that was available by default, man, that thing drains energy. Like if you do a quick boost, that's like 50% of your bar straight off
Ooh,
the
that's
bat.
rough.
Yeah, so and partially it does make sense. It's a tank. It's supposed to be slow, it's supposed to be somewhat drainy. Um
Yeah.
but I do think it really just means you have to play a little bit intelligently. So you can't just scrap all the time with an enemy. You do have to sort of think about your approach. Because you can do it with a tank, but I can tell you right now from the times that I tried to, uh, when you don't have that full dexterity and experience, it's hard.
Okay. So potentially justified. It might just be a little bit of a learning curve
Yeah.
as well, because it does sound like they play very differently
And
from your bipedal legs.
what? One thing I forgot to mention too. So, if you've seen the gameplay footage of the bazooka being used before it's fired,
Mhm.
the AC has to stand completely still. Tanks completely don't have to deal with that.
Nice, and quads too, is that right?
I think when it's floating.
Okay, so only when it's floating.
I think so. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I believe so. But yeah, but that means that tanks can fire both weapons at the same time with no problem.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, that's always been a piece of the advantage of tanks, so, yeah, maybe just the raw firepower that it can put out
Yeah.
is worth it. Okay. So moving on to quad legs, just since we brought it up and their ability to hover, which at least from the gameplay, I absolutely love just being able to float around,
Yep.
air. And it sounds like it's basically free once you get up there. You can just hover indefinitely. Any concern? I always go back to multiplayer, but that's where a lot of my community, we'll go with that. It's where a lot of them come from is
Mhm.
PvP, right? So any issue do you think of a quad leg just launching into the air and floating around and, there's not much you can do about it, and he's just pelting you?
No, and part of it has to do with the fact that when you are up there in the air, your mobility is a bit more limited because it's that float is still fairly slow. Yes, you can still quick boost, but you're eating up quite a bit of energy to do that. And then the last thing you need to remember is that in order to get up to that height, it does have to use some energy. So you're always going to have, a slight deficit no matter how you do it.
Mm.
And if you're
Yeah, no, that
and if you're going back to what I mentioned before, if you're even just a little bit slower, that opens you up to a lot of the heavier hitting weapons.
yeah, and if you get staggered, you just drop from the sky, right?
Yep.
Sounds relatively balanced, at least on paper.
Yeah.
Um, did you get a chance at all to mess around with the emblem creation or the paint, anything like that?
You know
It
what?
seemed
We
relatively close to 5.
the only thing we didn't get to fully go into was I think the emblem creator. So I think that one it was just that happened at the very when we went through sort of the paint system, we had to do it really quick because of the aforementioned issues with setups. So that
Yeah.
was something we didn't touch on super heavy, but we did have a look at the paint system, and I do have to say, so one, it is based on verdict days, so it's kind of robust from the get go, but it has a lot more options and it's a lot easier to use than before. So, for example, have you used Photoshop before?
To some extent,
Okay,
yeah.
so basically, you have the ability to adjust the color using sort of like a mini window where you can select it from a different color grade, along with changing RGB, and then you can also obviously modify by each individual part or group of parts. So the frame and then the weapons.
Okay, awesome. So very similar, but just a little bit easier to use.
Yep, much more refined.
It sounds like you can do things like increase or decrease your like glossiness or like reflectiveness, add rust, things like that. Is that right?
Yes, so this is their weathering system. So, and to me, this was a little bit crazy because of just how advanced it looks. So, when I saw it, it reminded me of the materials that you can select within SolidWorks, which is a um,
Yeah.
computer aided design program. So basically, you're able to select how shiny your AC is, and also like the level of weathering, so how much battle damage you have on the AC. And I think for the materials, you can select the reflectiveness and the luster. I don't remember what the difference is between the two, but basically, you have a lot of options there.
No, that sounds awesome. I'll definitely spend a lot of time with, emblems and paint and everything in N5 in order to weather an AC. You make decals and you
Oh yeah,
go through and painstakingly place them on everything. So that'll be nice just to
yeah.
be able to pop that on there.
Oh, the other thing too is they do have a decal system as well. So it also is designed. I think they took the feedback and sort of saw how players were building, um, those complex images on their AC, and they basically
Mhm.
transplanted it into this game as well.
Yeah, it seemed I saw, like, literally maybe 4 or 5 seconds of somebody running through it, and I think it was potentially in that same Japanese video that
Mhm.
shows some of the arena matches, but it seemed close. It was like, multiple groups of emblems, you have your animals and your
Yep.
letters and your shapes, and so it seemed relatively the same at initial glance.
Yep.
So, very cool. So let's see here. One thing I haven't seen, and again, it's probably floating in the gameplay somewhere, is I don't think I've seen any sort of snipers or sniper cannons.
Yeah, we didn't. They specifically didn't show that class of weapons. I think the closest thing you may have seen is it's either the rail or the linear gun.
Yeah, I think they do show the linear gun.
Yeah, I think that's I
Interesting.
think that's the closest equivalent. But basically, you charge it up and then you fire it, and that determines how much damage or the speed of the round.
That's interesting that they specifically didn't show that class. I'm curious how they behave. And I can't imagine that they would just remove it. We've pretty much always had snipers.
Oh yeah, I think it's just one of those things where they just didn't want to show too much.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's fair. So speaking of showing too much, because I think we have got a bunch of quick garage snippets of it, but
Mhm.
any standout, interesting melee weapons?
I want to say the pile bunker. Oh, actually,
That's fair.
I'm gonna take that back. Punching.
Yeah, I heard about this.
Yeah, it's you know what? I miss it the first time, probably just due to the euphoria of the situation. But you can now punch with
Mhm.
your AC, so you actually can technically have a fully melee AC just by punching people.
So I love it. Just what's the name of that game with the two robots that just box each other? And
Rock'em Sock'em Robots.
that's
Yep.
the one. That's gonna be the arena matches now.
Yeah, I
It's
know,
just
right?
rock 'em, sock
You're
'em,
probably going to see a lot of.
PvP
You're
rims.
also going to see a lot of people that probably just do punch only single player playthroughs.
Oh yeah, I love it. Punch only, S rank, single player play. That sounds so rough.
Yep.
What's the damage like on the punching? Any clue?
No, because I couldn't find any stats for it, so that was the weird part. But I actually only found out because I was watching another player just punch another enemy, and it was
That's awesome. Yeah, I don't think
yeah.
I've actually seen the clip of it yet. I'll have to track that down.
You know what? I haven't used up my full 20 minutes, so what I may do with Cleric, my other staff member, is just if we can find specific clips, we may just put them up on the AC page so that people can see those bits because I don't think everyone has covered everything yet. So we all have bits and pieces, but obviously there's going to be some
Yeah.
gaps.
Yeah, well, people want to see the punching.
Yeah.
I'm sure of it. I have a weirdly high amount of dedicated melee people in my community,
Ah,
and I think some of them are, maybe a little salty that melee is basically left side only. So there you go. You can pile bunker with the left and just punch people in the face with the right.
yep.
Along with that, it sounded like, and maybe you don't know with the amount of parts you guys had, but it sounded like that shield was left shoulder only or left back only.
Yep. Left back.
Interesting. Is that shields on the left back? Is that confirmed? That's like the only place that they are, or is there any hope for somewhere else?
I think there is a chance it could be on the other side because melee was the only thing that they specifically mentioned was on the left hand side. And I can't really think
So there's
of
still
like a gameplay reason why they wouldn't allow you to do it on the right.
right. I want my shield and sword.
But if you just do like a double shield AC that just kicks, that's like fifth gen all over
Yes,
again.
I love it. Well, that was the verdict day
Yeah.
thing, right? You just run in, yeah, with two shields kicking people.
Yep. Classic.
It really is. And God, the tanks like being able to drift and just ram over people in this one too.
Yep.
It's gonna be great. So the shield, I didn't see. I mean, everybody kind of started with it, right? But it seemed like everybody really quickly changed it off. How do you feel about it? Did it, how does it behave? It sounds like there's a window of what, like a second or something, right? When you first deploy it, that shields a little bit better. Outside of that, does it drain, ammo, or does it gradually overheat, or
No, so
what?
for that weapon, it didn't drain, to my memory. Um, Basically, once you deploy it, there's basically a window where the shield's the strongest. So I think you're right. It's about 1 or 2 seconds because I timed it. Once you activate it, where if you get hit, it mitigates the damage a lot, and if you do it after the fact, it does a lot more damage. So, for example, you have your AC, you deploy it immediately, it does like minus 200, but let's say you're a few seconds late, it'll do minus 500 damage.
Okay. And so I assume once that drops off, it kind of stays at that
Yeah, it doesn't.
lower, defense
Yeah,
rating.
it stays at that lower defense rating and it never drops below that. So, like, let's say you get hit a third time, 4 seconds later, it's still minus 500.
Okay, makes sense. But it does mean that I can just potentially, if they have one on the right side, I can just equip two of them and pop them out and hold down that button the
Yeah.
whole time for just a little bit of extra
Well, keep in
defense.
mind, it only lasts The shield itself, I think, lasts for like a grand total of like 5 seconds, so it's not permanent.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. So it actually does,
Dissipate, yeah.
okay. That makes sense. I was curious how they handled that, if it was just a time frame thing or overheat or what. So yeah, that
Mhm.
makes sense. It just pops out good for, a second or two for high defense and then retracts at like
Yep.
5 seconds. Okay. Awesome. Awesome. See all kinds of stuff I'm learning here. Um it seemed like there was a what did they call it? Like a stun rod or something like that as one of the melee options too.
Uh,
Did you get to play with that at all?
no, I don't think we did. We stuck primarily with the laser blades, I think.
Seemed that way. Um, so I guess on the note of laser blades or just melees
Mhm.
in general, because they've made them all fairly unique now. Previously, they've always behaved differently depending on what sort of leg types you
Mhm.
have equipped, and I don't know that I saw a tank use a laser blade.
I don't think anyone did because we actually talked about that after the fact, and we tried to verify if anyone else did, but apparently no one did. And so that's probably one of the
Oh
few things we
well,
didn't. No one tested.
nice. Yeah, I want to know, if it's that
Poke of
forward
death,
like
or
stabbing lance
yeah,
move. I mean, I feel like otherwise you're practically chopping off the front of your AC, so it's got to be somewhat different, right?
yeah, and I mean
So
that's the whole reason why they have a different animations. Like you don't want to have to
yeah.
cut off a piece of your AC every time you melee. Yeah,
Yeah, it seems
yeah,
not
it
the
kind of
best.
doesn't help.
Okay, okay. I don't even know if I saw it on a quad leg, so yeah, it's really just the reverse joints and the bipedals that we
Yep,
saw.
and I think it sort of makes sense too because um, those two were sort of the easier legs to use because we had
Yeah.
it's a bit of a learning curve because they said they streamlined the controls, but really they're still Armored Core wonky controls. Um, and this
Never
is
good.
something that not a lot of people have talked as much about, and I was sort of surprised is how the controls work. Um,
Yeah.
so I have actually the piece of paper they gave us. So left trigger, left button, right button, left trigger. That all just fires the weapons. If you want to use your assault boost, which is like your overboost, that one you click the left stick. Now here's sort of the catch. Once you click that stick, if you press left or right on the left stick, you basically do like a quick boost change. But it's so fast and it drains out so much energy, it's almost uncontrollable. And
Oh,
then the
geez.
other thing too is if you want to turn it off, you have to hit down on the left stick or run out of energy. That's
Oh,
it.
that's odd.
There's no other way to turn it off.
Huh. And seems like when you run out of energy, either in the air or doing that, you kind of drop and then it just shuts your boosters off.
So
Is that
you
right?
drop, and this is another weird thing, but your boosters don't necessarily shut off. The only way we found that you can shut off your boosters is if you stay completely still. You can turn the boosters on by pressing B, but you can't turn it off. So you can't do any like fast drops to the ground to avoid enemy fire like you did in 5 and Verdict Day.
Yeah. That's
Yeah,
interesting.
it was very odd. Most of the general controls were like tolerable, so it wasn't a huge deal. For me, it was definitely a big learning curve because I use custom controls for 5 and Verdict Day, and left
Mm.
trigger is my wall jumps. So in 5 and Verdict Day, I'm pressing that down all the
Yeah.
time. You press it down in 6, that's you're going to be in a real bad situation if the enemy isn't staggered. So I was running into that a lot for gameplay.
Yeah, yeah, I've always had my, jump or wall jump boosters, whatever,
Yep.
on the back triggers, so that's rough.
Yes, it cost me many a boss battle.
Oh, I bet. Yeah, that'll be a steep learning curve. And it sounds like there is a couple of controller variations, but I don't know, with the way the weapons work, I feel like you have to have those up top. There's just no other way to.
Uh,
I mean, I guess if you're not using 4 at once and you're using, like,
yeah.
the carousel or, like, missiles, you might could switch it to, like, triangle or something.
Yeah, and also with the way the controls are and how they have it's hard for me. Maybe I'll have to test this on a controller. It's hard for me a way to think to map this control that it would be, objectively better.
Yeah, it seems like there's so much going on that you just kinda have to take what you get. I mean, I guess the, hard lock on definitely helps, at least with
Oh
having
yeah,
to turn and jump and everything all at the
mm,
same time. Maybe you should get one of those controllers that
the
have the, like,
paddles.
3rd trigger down on the back of it.
Just put more buttons on the
Or what
controller.
is it?
That'll solve it.
Yeah, yeah, why we could flip it around and
Yep.
claw grip it, and then put 2 extra triggers on the I guess it'd be the front at that point, not the
Claw
back, but
reverse joint
or
special.
you get the, yeah, we pull out the Steel Battalion controller, and we have double joysticks, you know? There's definitely people already talking. I can't think of the name of the controller, but there's a newer model,
Right.
you know? People talking about doing runs with that. Trying to custom map that thing is gonna be an absolute nightmare, I'm sure.
I tried that in Verdict Day, and it's just like, nope, I can't do this. This is way too hard.
It seems really hard. It seems fun if you got it, you know, down and really dialed in, but it seems like a struggle.
It is.
Um, cool. So as you went through what was your favorite weapon? Anything that, like, really stood out as like, "Yes, this is the one."
Yeah, I honestly love the bazooka. Um, it's a combination of the damage it does, the way it hits, and the sound design. It feels amazing. It's one of those weapons that's very satisfying to use, even if it's a little bit difficult at times.
Mm. Yeah, and I've heard a lot of people comment on the sound design, and I mean, definitely even just listening to the
Yep.
gameplay, you know, on YouTube is great. So I can only imagine actually sitting there with headphones on. It's probably fantastic.
It is. Cleric talked a little about this a little bit for his experience, where he sort of felt like well, he was happy that they provided the headphones because it just was a much better experience that way. It's like the full experience basically. So moving forward, I guess I'm just gonna be playing it with headphones if it's that great.
That's fair.
Yeah.
I definitely will be for the most part anyway. Okay. Any other really standout points, you know, about the game that you don't think anybody's really talked in depth about?
Um. I have not had a chance to see everyone's footage. I've been, for the most part,
That's fair.
switching back and forth between work and also aggregating everything for the next PO. So I don't think anything right off the bat. It was a sort of a good thing that people got to play this time around because they got a better understanding and experience of Armored Core. So it cleared up a lot of things and it gave them a lot of good insights. So I'm gonna have to chicken out here and say no, nothing off the top of my head.
That's fair. Yeah, I'm super happy that people finally got to play it because just the community in general was getting really skeptical that there was just no gameplay, no HUD, no nothing, and we're, you know, a month out from release now. And they're like, well, are they not showing it because it's not complete, or maybe it's bad and they're not confident in it? And the answer is no. They're just FromSoft, and that's how they do
Yeah,
things.
and
But
it's like it's
but
honestly is
it's
probably like they probably had some inane, mundane reason for not showing you the lock, that reason has caused so much anxiety in the community.
yeah, the community's freaking out about it, and meanwhile,
Yeah.
they're in their office and just have no idea,
Yep.
you know, the dumpster
Yep.
fire that's going on. It's fantastic. Yeah, and we get more gameplay events coming up in
Yep.
Japan. They have the one at the camera store that they're doing throughout the month, and then some kind of special. I forget what they call it. Not a trailer or announcement, but a special kind of preview on like the 18th. So lots of more news to come, I think, mostly out of Japan.
I think the other thing too is From Software's method of operation is very much the wild card here. So chances are we'll probably get more stuff stateside. Um, but if anything, it'll be all last minute stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't expect any of this, and then, yeah, IGN put up a thing of like, "Oh, by the way, there's gameplay
Yep.
tomorrow." Like, "Okay, sweet." And then I'm, like, you know, watching the gameplay actively, and they're like, "Oh, by the way, Cowboy just dropped 20 minutes of actual
Yep.
gameplay." What is
Oh,
happening?
by the way, you have these other 20 people dropping another 20-minute each as well. Isn't that
Yeah,
great?
exactly. Yeah, just as I'm watching one, they just keep popping up faster than I can
Yeah.
watch them. So it was, there's a lot to go
Oh
through.
yeah.
In a way, though, it's nice. We've shifted from a place of, you know, I'm deeply analyzing the story trailer and like, oh, well, what does this chord here mean? And the mech moved here right when this guy, you know,
Mhm.
maybe stopped breathing. And we've moved, you know, maybe slightly away from the minuscule speculation and now more into general gameplay and what does this actually act
Mm,
like. So I'm definitely excited about that one.
definitely.
Cool. I think we'll
draw it to a close, I think the last thing that I want to touch on, again, because most of my community is really PvP excited, and we had all kinds of speculations. So it sounds like confirmed 1v1 and 3v3 with up to 3 spectators. They've really dialed it back from at least 5th gen. I expected some 2v2, maybe some. I wasn't really expecting clan stuff, but just some alternate game modes or something a little bit more than 2 game modes. Any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, and we've asked them about this. Like, we didn't just ask them, hey, is there multiplayer? But also, like, if there isn't, is there a reason why? And their answer has been pretty much the same. They want to focus on Armored Core as a single experience. So yes, this game has multiplayer, elements, but it's not really the main focus anymore. They really wanted to go back to more of that older style AC, where you have just a really, really good sort of an odd word to use, because some of the missions and designs of the previous Armored Core games are not great, but they wanted to create like just a really good Armored Core game, classic style.
Yeah.
And they sort of left it off that there may potentially be something, but it really didn't sound optimistic, So really, they're not going for that approach this time around, is really just the long and short of it.
So I'm not going to get my expansion 6 months from now that's includes siege matches and multiplayer co-op bosses and clan wars.
You might, because we also asked about the question for DLC, and they're just being vague, just because they don't have anything planned right now, which is sort of obvious. They're putting sort of their heart and soul into the main game, but they basically left it open, saying, "Hey, if Armored Core 6 does well enough, who knows? Maybe."
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like we're at least getting regulation patches, which I'm happy about. So they'll be kind of actively balancing it, even if it wasn't their main focus going into it. So I'm at least happy about that. I do wish we got some form of UNAC or AI partner, and some 2v2 matches would have been great. But I'm happy that we have multiplayer and PvP. So I will take what I get for now, and then I will hope for more in the future, I suppose. Well, great. It's been awesome talking to you. Thanks so much for coming on. Is there anything that you want to shout out? Anything you want to mention right here at the end?
Yeah, just real quick, guys. If you haven't already, I would recommend you follow Armored Core Legacy on Twitter. We're at AC Legacies, Facebook Armored Core Legacy, and I think on Reddit it's Armored Core-PO. And the Facebook page, Armored Core Legacy. YouTube page. We do have some more AC content coming, particularly more stuff of what you've seen that other people have shown, and then some things that haven't been shown yet. So definitely check us out. We'll have all that stuff coming in the next few days.
Amazing. Well, we look forward to it. Thanks again. I'll see you next time.
Of course. Thanks for having me. Have a good one.
You too.
Oh, looks like it's time to wrap things up. If you enjoyed today's broadcast, don't forget to follow, subscribe, and check out our Discord. You can find me at NoisyRen on YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter. And if you want to support the podcast, you can find me at patreon.com/NoisyRen. I appreciate the support. Coral is not cheap these days. As usual, the links are in the show notes. Till next time. Connection terminated.